I'm Doug Boucher. I direct the Tropical Forest and Climate Initiative, and I'm Director of Climate Research and Analysis at the Union of Concerned Scientists, where I've been for about 8 years. And our major goal in the Tropical Forest Program is to reduce and eventually end tropical deforestation, particularly the emissions of greenhouse gases and the climate impact of tropical deforestation, which is one of the important sources of global warming. And for the last 10, 15 years, UCS has had as a sort of major theme of our work the interlocking issues of climate and energy, renewable energy and climate change, and avoiding the most dangerous consequences of climate change. So our tropical forest work sort of fits into that because of the role of both deforestation and the clearing of peat forests in particular as sources of greenhouse gases. Almost all deforestation now is in the tropics, and that's a change from what it was historically. The temperate zone, the boreal forests were very widely cleared across both Europe, Asia, North America in the 1800s into the 1900s, and it's really only in the second half of the 20th century that tropical deforestation became very important. And now, though, it is the major deforestation going on worldwide. And it's focused in particular in 3 main areas: in Southeast Asia, in the central part of Africa, and in the Amazon in Latin America. And although there have been some successes in reducing it in recent years, particularly in the Amazon, it's still responsible for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. It still destroys about 5 million hectares of forest every year. So it's a major problem, and obviously really important for wildlife, for the great apes, and for biodiversity in general. It's quite different for the 2 regions. In Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia and Malaysia, it's plantation agriculture, particularly oil palm and increasingly also pulp and paper plantations that are the major threat to the orangutan's habitat there, and has already destroyed a great deal of that habitat. And Indonesia is now the country that has the highest level of deforestation worldwide, now that it has been reduced considerably in Brazil. So there it's really large-scale commercial agriculture expanding into the wet forest regions that threaten the orangutan, both directly destroying their habitat, and also because they're killed when they come close to or into plantations. Their young ones are taken for the pet trade, etc. In Africa, it's quite different. First of all, the deforestation rates overall in Africa are actually considerably lower than in either the Amazon or Southeast Asia. And they are much more small-scale expansion and particular kinds of industries. So around mining centers, for example, in areas where charcoal is being made for fuel for urban areas. And there, again, there is habitat destruction, but it's things like the bushmeat trade, for example, hunting of the great apes, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, that is really a major threat to them there. I would say, though, that if the large-scale expansion of commercial agriculture is a major current threat in Southeast Asia, it's a potential future threat in Africa. We haven't seen that expansion yet. It's been relatively restricted. There are a few palm oil plantations. There's a few cases of agriculture on a large scale, but it certainly could be a threat in the future. In Africa, the future course of development is going to be very important for the great apes, and particularly how palm oil develops. The climate is pretty good for it in quite a few of the countries, particularly the wetter parts of Central Africa. It could be a large-scale plantation crop, and it could have substantial economic benefits. But if it's done at the expense of large-scale clearing of forest, it represents a real threat to biodiversity, and of course, in particular, to the habitat of the great apes, most of which have relatively restricted ranges, have relatively small populations, and are particularly vulnerable. And it's both the direct effect of the plantations and the associated bushmeat trade that I think could be a problem. At the same time, that's an opportunity, because it means that the course of development could go in a different direction, not at the expense of forests, not at the expense of biodiversity. And so rather than sort of trying to stop a bad trend that is already well underway, you could conceivably see it go in a different direction, not quite from the beginning, but from a very early stage. We're doing research, but it's not on the ground. It's not field work in the regions. It's more research on what are the trends in deforestation, what are the main drivers, what are the companies involved in many cases, what are the supply chains, for example, that palm oil that's produced in Indonesia goes to some major trader companies, that a very small number of which control almost the entire market, and from there it goes to large numbers of consumer goods companies, names you see in the grocery store every day, the Nestle and Unilever and Procter & Gamble and Colgate-Palmolive. It's used in an incredible variety of products, thousands and thousands of products. It's actually been estimated that in the U.S., if you walk down the aisles of a typical grocery store, about half of the products will have some palm oil in it. So that's information that is very important in terms of connecting consumers to the things that they buy, and the consumer goods companies to the places that they're sourcing from, and moving them to get to adopt zero deforestation commitments and follow through on implementing them, so that the supply chain no longer has deforestation as part of it. Well, we have now over 20 major corporations that have adopted zero deforestation commitments. They are variable in how soon they go into effect, in how transparent they are, in a lot of the details of exactly what they're committing to. And sometimes those details are really important. So, for example, is it just what they buy directly, or is it all the palm oil they use? Is it what they buy from other companies that are not subsidiaries of theirs? But by and large, we've actually made faster progress than I expected in getting zero deforestation commitments as sort of a basic way of doing business. And so you've got some really large multinationals, whether it's Dunkin' Donuts or Procter & Gamble or Nestle or Unilever, that have made these commitments and are now following through on implementing them. And of course, we have to, and we will be watching very carefully to make sure that their actual implementation is effective, really follows through on what they've committed, what they've promised to do. My background is as a scientist, I have a PhD in ecology, and so information to me is vital. Knowing all the details about, where are the ape populations, what resources are they dependent on, what are the threats to them, what has been happening in recent years with their populations, are they up, are they down, and what are the causes of that? So to me, this kind of synthesis that State of the Apes offers of all the great ape species all over the world, and really very detailed information of all kinds, is really valuable. Frankly, as a biologist, I think we need that kind of information for all of the living world. There's just such incredible diversity out there, and most of the living species we know very little about. And what we do know is sort of in scientific journals, difficult to access and so hard to put together. So this kind of synthesis, I think, is an enormous service. I'd like to see it be something that companies, for example, when they're making commitments, specifically say, okay, we will not develop any habitat of the great apes. We will avoid those areas and other areas too, obviously, with other species, but certainly at a minimum those areas. And not only companies that are directly developing plantations and such, but companies that are buying from them will make the same commitment, and will be able to be proud of how they're sourcing their raw materials that go into all the products they make. In the early part of my career, individual scientists would gather data, they would analyze it, they would publish papers, and they didn't share it. It was, their property. It was a valuable resource that they used to produce publications and get tenure, and so it was regarded as normal that it would sit in their files and nobody else would know anything about them except what they wrote in the papers. And in the last couple decades, we've really seen a movement towards what is often called open science, in which the expectation is that, yes, you'll gather data, yes, you'll publish papers, but all the data will be freely shared. And of course, the World Wide Web allows us to do that. You can share data with people all over the world easily and cheaply. And so that is being accompanied by a change in the thinking of scientists.